Welcome. I'm Gadi Levy, the Executive Director of the Streicker Center, and I'm honored to begin tonight's program by introducing two individuals whose vision and generosity made it possible. First, someone whose name we all recognize, John Streicker, former president of Temple Emanu-El and a donor who has allowed his and encouraged his family namesake.
Hi, this is Erica.
He will then be followed by Dr. Masha Mimran, a member of the Temple Board of Trustees. If you'd like to submit a question for our speakers, please do so using the Zoom chat function. I'd like also to remind everybody that right now in the chat function, we will put a link for you to purchase the copy of the book if you have yet to do so. Let's begin. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. John Streicker. John?
Bernard, how are you?
How are you, Tom?
Great, terrific to see you. Great to be here.
Okay, but I don't know what just
Great,
happened.
great to be with you too, to discuss with you tonight.
Bernard, I'm going to suggest that I begin by just asking you to summarize the book.
Yes, but John, hold on. I think we got lost. We like to do the formal introduction. Masha, why don't you start?
Sure. Yeah, he seemed to have disappeared from the...
Okay, why don't you go with your part? It's okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Gadi, and thank you, John. I hope that even though we can't see him, he can hear us, and to all of you for being with us this evening. It is my honor to introduce tonight's extraordinary guests, two men whose voices have framed so much public understanding and debate, both in Europe and in the United States, about who we are, where we have been, and where we are going. Bernard-Henri Lévy is one of the most influential intellectuals of our time. With the publication of his book, Barbarism with a Human Face in 1977, he also launched an unprecedented controversy over the European left's complicity with totalitarianism. His unique combination of writing, underground activism, and support for democratic rights has never wavered. Beginning with his reporting and presence on the battlefield during the War of Liberation in Bangladesh in 1971, continuing to the Bosnian War, Darfur, Afghanistan, the Libyan War in Kurdistan, Israel, and more. Today, after over 30 published works of philosophy, political essays, fiction, and theater, hundreds of articles and op-ed, 4 war documentary films, and a new series of articles from the front lines in Somalia, Syria, Ukraine, and more since 2019. Bernard-Henri Lévy has turned his incisive mind to the moment we're currently enduring. Returning to Michel Foucault's concept of the medical gaze, he asks that we think critically and defend human society from potentially catastrophic threats to our collective future. Since the publication of Monsieur Bernard-Henri Lévy, Ce virus qui rend fou, earlier this spring, I have to say that I have been awaiting its translation into English with impatience. The virus in the age of madness, I believe, offers a crucial, if not vital, reflection on the multiple meanings of a lockdown, the more perverse and dangerous pitfalls of what it also means to confine one's thinking and one's gaze towards the other. Yes, to being safe and responsible, but no to the confinement of our mind. Tonight, he will discuss with Thomas Friedman, one of America's leading newspaper columnists, his insights captured in this new book. Mr. Friedman began reporting for the New York Times in 1981. He served as the Beirut bureau chief, the Jerusalem bureau chief, chief diplomatic correspondent, international economic correspondent, and since 1995, its foreign affairs columnist. The recipient of 3 Pulitzer Prizes, Thomas Friedman is the author of 7 New York Times best-selling books. It's great to have you back, Mr. Friedman. It is such a pleasure to welcome you both at the Streicker Center, Monsieur Thomas Friedman and Monsieur BHL. Merci.
Thank you, Masha.
Thank you.
Bernard, it's so great to be with you. The timing of your book and this conversation couldn't be better. I'm seeing the participants climbing as we sit here, and that's a great credit to you and the number of people who want to hear your insights. I thought maybe we'd begin by just asking you to summarize the book. Take 5-7 minutes as you like. Then let me maybe come back with my own take on the pandemic, and then let's iterate back and forth and see if we can drill down to a real vein of understanding for all our listeners here. Bernard, over to you.
Thanks, Tom. Great pleasure and great honor to have this discussion with you. For me, it's a treat, and I'm very happy of this occasion. To make a summary is difficult, but what do I mean by the title? Let's start this way, Ce virus qui rend fou, which is translated in a slightly different way in American, virus in the age of madness. In French, I said, this virus who makes us mad. There are two sorts of madness induced, created by this virus. The first one, on which we will agree, you and me, and I will not insist a lot, is those who deny the virus. Those who don't want to see the virus, those who put a mask on reality, and who fall into neurosis, like children in a sandbox, seeing their toy, which is their economy or their re-election, spoiled, and who just act in a crazy, stupid, and criminal way. Meaning, with all the respect due to your country, I'm meaning your president, some of his entourage, some of his partisans, and others. Bolsonaro in Brazil, and many others. This is the first way to be mad and to react with madness to this pandemic. On this, I'm sure we will agree, so I will not spend 7 minutes on that. There is another way to be mad, which is the way we react to this pandemic. You have, of course, a lot of people who react and act with cold blood, with wisdom, for sure. But you have also a pandemic of hysteria all over the world and of selfishness. I believe, for example, that the way we are giving power to the doctors who don't wish it, by the way, who don't wish so much, is a reaction of as if we were lost, and when you are lost, you act in a sort of rather crazy way. Too much. The doctors know they have to be respected, but they are not gods, and their knowledge is not parole d'évangile, is not evangelical word. If we consider it as such, it is an abuse of authority. This is the way to be mad. Another way to be mad is to consider. I try to listen to the words. My job, my specialty, if I have one, is not medicine, but it is ideas, it is words, it is how people express. In some of the sentences which spread in our world, I cannot help hearing something which bothers me. For example, social distancing. Of course it is necessary. Of course we have to accept it for a while. I don't know if it will be a month, if it will be a year, if it will be a few years, for sure. But as for myself, I accept it as a terrible and sad obligation. I accept it as a sorrow. But what I see in Europe and maybe in America is a lot of people accepting it as a sort of new normal state of the things. As for myself and you and a lot of those who listen to us and most of the followers of Temple Emanu-El, we did spend our life fighting social distancing. Social distance is precisely what we are fighting against. Most of us who are listening now to this conversation, by all possible ways. Social distance means inequality, means despise, and so on and so on. There is a way to accept it as a new normal way of being, which is a sort of panic. And which, when I hear Dr. Anthony Fauci, I don't know if it was in the New York Times or in the Wall Street Journal, saying as a sort of evidence that shake hands will not come back before very, very long and that it's okay, like this. Again, I say, but what is happening? Shake hands, of course, is a very little thing. It's a very tiny symbol, but it is a symbol of great things. Shake hands is a sign of peace, is a sign of a fair contract. It is a sign of equality. It is the way in which humans look at each other with mutual respect, eyes in eyes, face against face, instead of the previous time when one looked down at the other, and so on and so on. So in this way of consenting, accepting, maybe cherishing the symptoms of these moments, there is a sort of craziness. I take another last example, and then the floor will be to you. This confinement, as we say in France, lockdown, as you say in America, consists for too many people in a sort of moment of self-focusing, digging in oneself, going back to what is supposed to be the truth of each of us, which is inner truth, which is for me opposite to the real duty of a man, of a Jewish woman or man, especially, which consists in precisely getting out of yourself, getting to the other, transforming yourself into a host for the other, or transforming yourself into an hostage of the other and of the misery of the other. So again, this is another example of this sort of bad effects or side effects, which I will accept if they last a limited time, but which appear to me as a real disaster if they had to be consistent with a new normal state of things. This is, for me, the second madness, and this is the main idea, let's say, of this book.
There's one other thing before I just give a few thoughts of my own, but that I really, a very important point I think you raised. And it's about what's called in the language of American popular culture today, safetyism. You know, because you really ask, I think, a very fundamental question. In previous pandemics, certainly if we go back to 1918, there was a rather tragic view of the human condition, the coming and going of pandemics. And it was that a pandemic happens, some will die, but we will not lock down the whole economy to try to save every single person. There was a much more tragic kind of sensibility. Life was nasty, brutal, and short. Literally, lifespans were shorter. And you've raised a point, and in some interviews as well. Why did that change? That sense, we've approached this pandemic very differently from previous ones in history. And what role maybe did the internet play in that?
What has changed is probably relies on internet, but relies also on metaphysics, our conception of what is the meaning of being a human being, and so on. There are two changes, one which is good and one which is less good. The good change is that life is much more sacred than it was in 1918 and 19. At the end of the day, remember, it was the end of the First World War, which was a butchery, which would be unacceptable today. We are in a time where for wars, for example, even if we don't target really zero dead, but the death is considered the death of an American soldier, of a French soldier, and of a civilian, even if it happens so much. Think of Syria and others, is a scandal today, which it was not at this time. This is a good change. Things which were in the order of nature today are scandal. But tragic means another thing, and this is is not as good. We are in a moment of our destiny where we think that we can really overcome, we can really topple, we can really get rid of the tragic, that we can really get rid of the part of inevitable loss, lack, evil, whatever you call it, which is in human destiny. At the end of this process, you have even the idea that you can triumph against, that you can win against death itself, that you can target a new humanity where we will be as gods, as a famous French writer said, and which will get rid of all possible diseases. To get rid of tragedy, to put tragedy far from us, means also that. Means this dream of a humanity getting rid of this part maudite, of this cursed part of itself. And I think that it is very dangerous to enter into this path. Alas, but the experience, the thoughts of the wisest philosophers of the last centuries tell us that if we go too far in this optimist and anti-tragic dream, if we really cross the evil, if we decide to delete or to erase it as on a computer, a program not convenient, we get a much worse evil or harm than the one we thought we erased. So on one side, we consider life as sacred. On the other side, we feed the dream of a humanity getting rid of death, which might be a way of creating much damage than the damage we avoid. This is what changed relatively at the beginning of the 20th century.
I thought it was one of the most interesting points in your book, and it's a good place for us to segue, maybe to let me share with you my perspective, because it's actually the point where we meet. But I get there from a very different route. You come at it through a very philosophical perspective, and I would say in many ways a European one. And I actually I got there through a different way, actually by looking at natural systems. And so your book is just such a wonderful framing, a perspective of a philosopher on this. And I actually come at the pandemic actually from the perspective of an environmentalist. But we're going to end at the same place. So let me share with you just in brief, so how I got to the same conclusion. My daughter, Natalie, is the executive producer of All Things Considered Weekend on National Public Radio, so I never missed a show. And on Easter Sunday, they did a roundup of pastors' sermons from around the country at the height of the pandemic. And my favorite was Pastor Michael Curry from the National Cathedral, who ended his Easter sermon by singing a little song. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole wide world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. Now, if you just substitute, Bernard, she for he, you'll know where I start with the pandemic. She got the whole world in her hands. This is the first time for our generation of human species that we have all at the same time, simultaneously been in the grip of Mother Nature. Unless you're 103 and we're here in 1918, this is basically the first time all of us have been in the grip of what I call one of Mother Nature's fastballs. So to put it in American baseball terms, Mother Nature throws pitches at us. She throws fastballs at us. They're called germs and viruses. They're called hurricanes and tornadoes and floods and droughts and forest fires. They're all the things she throws at us to sort out the fittest. Who shall get their DNA into the next generation and who shall not? Now, when Mother Nature throws her fastballs at us, she actually doesn't reward the strongest. She doesn't reward the smartest. She only rewards the most adaptive. That's who she rewards. That's what Darwin taught us. And she actually only rewards 3 adaptation strategies. She basically asks every individual, every collective, 3 questions. First of all, are you humble? Do you respect my virus? Because if you don't, I will hurt you or someone you love. Second, she asks, are you coordinated in your response to my virus? Because I've evolved my virus over millennia to find any crack in your immune system, your individual immune system or your collective immune system. And lastly, she asks, is your adaptation strategy to my virus built on chemistry, biology, and physics alone? Because if they're built on politics, ideology, and an election calendar, not chemistry, biology, and physics, I will hurt you or someone you love. Because I, Mother Nature, I'm just chemistry, biology, and physics. That's all I am. You can't talk me up, you can't talk me down. You can't say, Mother Nature, we're having a bad recession. Could you take a few months off? I will do whatever chemistry, biology, and physics dictate, and only that. And to put it again in American baseball terms, I always bat last, and I always bat 1,000. I haven't lost a duel in 4.8 billion years. So that is where I start, and it's actually, Bernard, where my tragic sensibility comes from. Because When you're up against Mother Nature, trade-offs are always built into the scenario. They are inevitable, okay? So to me, the key mistake that we made in America, or our president made, and I don't need to turn this into a Trump bashing session, but we all know what he is. Trump's great failure, analytically, to begin with, of many, but the central one is he does not look at the world through natural systems. He only looks at the world through markets. His only experience with natural systems is actually building golf courses, where he believed he could actually triumph over nature, because he would actually build waterfalls. He's famous for building waterfalls on his golf course. So he actually thought he could triumph over nature. So you may recall early in the pandemic, he gave a disastrous speech. The market went down a record number of points. And then the next day he changed policy, amended it, and the market went up a record number of points. He actually took a screenshot of the market rise, and he sent it to a man named Lou Dobbs, who's on Fox Business News. And that knucklehead showed it. Trump autographed that graph of the market going up. And Lou Dobbs, that knucklehead, showed it on the evening business news of Fox TV. While they were doing that, the two of them, Mother Nature was silently, inexorably, exponentially, and mercilessly spreading coronavirus from coast to coast. So the central challenge, and this gets to me to the core of your tragic point, but I'm going to come at it through nature, is from the very beginning, Bernard, we had to have a two-pronged policy. That the right policy from the very beginning was, how do we maximize saving lives and livelihoods at the same time in a pandemic where you are up against Mother Nature? You had to try to maximize lives and livelihoods, because if you just lock down everything and crush the economy, so many more people will die over time, deaths of despair from lost jobs and homes and businesses and hope, than will ever die from COVID-19. And so the challenge is always, how do you do both? Now, we saw three basic models around the world in that, and I'll end with this. We saw the Chinese model. Chinese model was actually to use the state surveillance system China has developed to control its people, to try to control a virus. And they were super efficient. They didn't just flatten the curve, they crushed the curve. But they did it by using a huge state surveillance apparatus to test, track, and trace and quarantine people with the virus. We had democratic variants of that. France had one, Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, Germany, we had democratic variants of that. And depending on the culture and the efficiency of the government, some worked better and some worked less worse. The second model was the Swedish model. The Swedish model said, we're actually going to balance lives and livelihoods by keeping part of the economy open, part of the school system open. We'll close other parts, we'll encourage social distancing, but we'll actually go for herd immunity. So the Chinese wanted to crush the virus and wait for a vaccine to get herd immunity. The Swedes said, let's actually do it by letting the young and the healthy go out, acquire the virus, overcome it, and we'll get natural herd immunity. And then the last model is the American model, which was to talk like we were doing like China, to act like we were doing like Sweden, to prepare for neither, and to claim to be superior to both. That basically is the Trump strategy. And it's given us this incredible mess now, where we're neither maximizing lives nor livelihoods. So that's how I come to the tragic sensibility that you arrived at. But it's coming there through the root of looking at the problem as a natural systems problem and what happens when you're up against Mother Nature.
Okay. Again, it's very interesting. We reach the same point and we start from a different stem, a different source. About Trump and about the state of America, alas, I must say, I would love to disagree. I would love that one of us is too pessimistic, but we agree 100%. And this, for me, from a European who believes so much in America, it is heartbreaking. It is a great sorrow. As I often say, I belong to this category of Europeans who would not even be alive without the Americans, the American sacrifices and the American values. And to see America in the state where it is today is just a catastrophe.
Now, let me elaborate on a brilliant point I thought you made, that we are, from a European point of view, you were saying, we're almost back to a pre-Christopher Columbus
point, exactly.
Lovely.
Exactly. We Europeans, for the first time in since ages, we don't expect anything from America. Years before, you had anti-Americans, you had pro-Americans, but at least America was on the table. America was the object of fascination, of repulsion, of love, of hate. It was in the center of the game. In Europe, no expectation for America. For the rest of the world, and especially for the new dictators or the new imperialist powers like new Ottoman Empire, like Russia, like China, like Iran in Kurdistan, they are moving, they are stepping in as if America did not exist. This is what I mean by a pre-Columbus, Christoph Columbus world. And that was absolutely unthinkable a few years ago. The word of America does not count. The possible retaliation of America is not taken into consideration. And this is not only sad, but dangerous, humiliating for America, for the West in general, and so on. We agree on that. We agree on all that you said at the end. Where we disagree, and I think I'm going to stress on that because we advance more by disagreeing than agreeing. You said what Mother Nature was asking us at the beginning, the question she was. I agree with all these questions, but there are other questions which Mother Nature addresses to us since the beginning of this pandemic. Mother Nature asks also, do you have a home? Stay at home. This is the motto. Okay, but do you have a proper home? Do you have a place in which you can stay? And Mother Nature knows that there is a huge difference between having a house in the Connecticut where you can stay during the pandemic and to being homeless. Mother Nature asks, do you have some money aside with which you spare money with which you can hold on for months or years? Or are you a daily worker in Bangladesh who just will disappear, will die from hunger if there is 1 week without work? Mother Nature asks, do you belong to a healthcare network which allows you to go to hospital when you feel symptoms, or don't you? And do you have to transform your little home into an annex of the hospital? Do you have to be condemned to an hospitalization, to a becoming hospital of your own home, which is quite another thing. Mother Nature asks, do you have the chance, are you lucky enough to be born? Nevertheless, in spite of what I said in America or in Europe, which are democratic countries where at least you have a civil society who protest when the president is too much crazy? Or do you belong to a country dominated by a dictator and where the coronavirus is used as an argument to lock down people in the old sense of the word, which means just for. Modern nature asks these questions also. And modern nature acts in complicity, acts as the main actor of social Darwinism. Modern nature makes the separation between the lucky who will survive and the unlucky who will die. So how have we to react to these questions of modern nature? We have to react, and this is my point, we have to react by an overdose of intelligence and knowledge. We have to be much more sophisticated, intelligent than her. We have to be more wise than she is. We have to connect all possible knowledges available. For example, to find a vaccine, we have to match the laboratories working in New Zealand, in Sweden, in America, in South Africa, and so on. We have to declare a sort of scientific emergency where all women and men of goodwill connect and work hand in hand in order to reply to the challenge of modern nature. We have to have modern nature acts in a way as not very differently than the terrorists. She shoots blindly, and not exactly blindly, the weakest, as I said, those who don't have health care and so on and so on. So we have to act exactly as we do when we are stricken by terrorism. Remember, after World Trade Center, the good move was to say, we retaliate, but we remain faithful to our values. We don't accept this moment of emergency. We don't accept this moment of emergency to have as a consequence to forget our values. This was very important in the time of Bush, remember. Same today. The good reaction to these blind questions addressed by modern nature is to remain more than ever faithful to our creeds. The creed, for example, that the other one is more important than myself. The creed that the life of a lady in Bangladesh is as important as the life of a student in Yale University, which makes me the honor to publish my book, and so on and so on. This is the values on which we have to which we have to keep faithful more than ever, because modern nature is humiliating these values. We have to cherish them more than ever. And one of the values we have to cherish is the values of what we have called since a few centuries humanism. And what is humanism? It is, in a way or in another, accept it or not, but to prevail over Mother Nature, to be stronger than she is, to accept her, but to add to Mother Nature this part of sophistication, intelligence, soul, spirit, which only humanity owns. And this, by the way, we are speaking under the hospitality of Temple Emanu-El. This is the Jewish wisdom. The Jewish wisdom just consists in, from the start to today, to say, for ages, Mother Nature did dictate her law. We are going to respect her, but we decide that if we respect her too much, it is idolatry, and that there is something above, which is God, which is the Torah, which is the laws of Noah, whatever you call that, but something which only the human being can produce and which has to be stronger. Not building golfs, of course, but saying, for example, that to save a body is not enough if we are not able also to save the spirit and the values, which is the reason why, and this is one of the chapters of my book, the Talmud says so often that the best doctors will go to hell. This is a very strange word of the Talmud. The best doctors will finish in hell because they treat the body, they treat the human being as a body, the body as a piece of Mother Nature, reduced to Mother Nature, and they forget this sort of strike of light, which makes a woman a woman, a man, and mankind, mankind. So this is our difference, I think.
I'm not sure it's a difference. Everything you described, Bernard, would fall under my category. You have to be coordinated in your response. And one reason SARS-CoV-1 actually did not become the pandemic it did was actually because China, Southeast Asian countries, America, Europe actually were coordinated in ways they aren't today. And part of coordination is also providing a safety net for the most disadvantaged. I think the big question that will come out of this, one of the things that we've learned most from this crisis is that it was actually the people at the bottom of the pyramid, the so-called bottom of the pyramid, who have been the first responders saving us in this crisis, unlike 9/11. That is to say, obviously the doctors and the nurses and the healthcare workers, they're the true first responders. But the people actually stocking the grocery shelves, driving the trucks, unloading the trucks, working in those grocery stores every day for minimum or near minimum wage, probably living in conditions that they can't social distance in, probably having minimal, if no, health care. The real question is, after this pandemic is over, that we will understand that what we are doing in an emergency now, however we're doing to help them, Amazon giving them raises and whatnot in the moment, how do we make that permanent? How do we understand that the value that they've been bringing through all of this? So all of that just falls under my category of being coordinated, because coordinated doesn't just mean that we cooperate. It's coordinated means you're elevating and protecting the very people who are doing the most to protect you. You raise a really interesting question about the lockdown being used by the Urbans and the Kaczynskis and these new sort of authoritarian populists. Talk about a little of that from a European perspective. That's something Americans might not be so aware of. How are the Erdogans, the Orbans, the Kaczynskis, the Putins using this crisis to actually reinforce their kind of majoritarian, politics?
I'm going to come to that, but just a minute in your sense about those invisibles who hold on their shoulder, who did hold on their shoulders the world during the pandemic and was still doing. I completely agree on that. They were really supporting the roof of the earth and of the globe on their modest and humble hands. And again, there is a great Talmudist called Haim de Volozhin. Some in the audience, I'm sure, and yourself, of course, know Haim de Volozhin in his masterpiece, which was called The Soul of the Life, said that the world was sustained, supported, was held by the humbles among the humbles who were, in his thought, those who studied. by the study, by the maneuvering the words, you prevented the world from de-creating itself. Today, those who prevent the world from de-creation, there is the creation and the decreation, those who prevent the world from decreation are these social workers, these conductors of lorries, and so on and so on. And this is, I agree so much on that, and the more we can be aware of that, the best. As for those who take advantage of the pandemic, it is Europe for sure. Viktor Orban, I happen to know him a little since 30 years. I met him 30 years ago. The main difference between the young Orban and the old Orban of today is that the young Orban cared about lives. Orban of today does not give a shit about the life of a migrant or the life of what he considers an old Hungarian. But this pandemic for him is a divine surprise, as the French fascists said in 1940, a divine surprise. It is a help of God. This is the way he considers it. God is whispering to his ear and allowing him to make more heavy his grip, his hand on his society. Same Putin. The first reaction of Putin was to take advantage of this situation, of this emergency, in order to declare himself president for maybe the rest of his life. And you have even worse out of Europe. You have some countries, like for example, in Nigeria, a country which I happen to know a little. I was there recently. In Nigeria, now it is not true any longer, but in mid-April, these have to be fact-checked exactly, but you had, frankly, near a comparable number of deaths from COVID and from police, Nigerian police, taking advantage of the COVID to shoot, really, dead shooting people, for example, when they were starving and getting out of houses and so on and so on. And another example of that, which is so sad, it happens again that just after the end of the French confinement, I went to the Greek island, which is the island of Lesbos. Lesbos is a place where a lot of refugees from Sudan and from Turkey arrive when they try to reach Europe. They stop in Lesbos and they are locked down in Lesbos. And there is a camp in Lesbos which is organized for 2,000 maximum people and who shelters 20,000. And what is so despicable and horrible is that the Greek government, that is a democratic government for sure, one of the first things he did was to decree a lockdown from this huge camp of 20,000 people of Lesbos. They are really in jail. It was decided that nobody could step out because of the COVID. The COVID became an argument to implement what was the dream of a lot of people probably in Greece and in Europe, which was to lock completely these people. I visited the camp 1 month ago. I made a story in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago about that. It is no longer a camp, it is a jail. It is not even a jail, it is a hell. And this is the limit example of what you are saying, of the way in which some democratic powers, because Greece is not Erdogan, for sure, it's a great democracy. It is the beginning, the start of democracy, but the way in which the virus is instrumentalized in order to take some really unfair and not criminal, of course, but undemocratic, let's say unhumanistic decisions. This is another example, the most striking of all. And honestly, I spent 2 or 3 days in this camp, and I was horrified to see how Mother Nature was taken hostage by a democratic government in order to implement the common plan of Europe with hypocrisy and Erdogan with bragging, decided to implement regarding the refugees who are now the common enemy of all of us, which is a disaster because they bring so much to Europe. Now they are considered as outlaw, and COVID helps that.
So the big question that I'm pondering here, of course, is how much of the madness we've seen in our country will be with us if and when Donald Trump is no longer president, God willing. I wrote today about what is probably for me the most of a long list of disturbing things that have been evidenced by this pandemic, disturbing behaviors in America. And for me, it's really comes down to the politicization of the face mask. The idea that
I read the text, yeah, your text.
Wearing a face mask would be a cultural marker, a political statement. And a society that can politicize a face mask, it might as well be a seatbelt. You know, a society that can politicize that, can politicize anything. Physics, rainfall, it can politicize anything. And one of the most disturbing features of the last, not just 3.5 years, but even before, is the inability that we've lost our, what my friend Marina Gorbis calls our cognitive immunity. Okay, we haven't just lost our physical immunity. We've lost our cognitive immunity, our ability to embrace and act on shared truths. We've lost our cognitive immunity thanks to social networks attacking them, foreign powers attacking it, a president decrying anything he doesn't like as fake news. And the loss of our cognitive immunity on the eve of this pandemic has only made the pandemic worse. So we cannot agree on, again, the facts of whether a therapy is even effective or not. And we cannot agree on certain just fundamental principles of like a face mask. I find that deeply threatening to our democracy, whether Joe Biden is president or Donald Trump is president. Certainly I prefer Joe Biden. I know he won't fuel that fire. But I'm curious, because one of the things that strikes me, Bernard, is that no one else in the world is behaving this way. No one else is politicizing face masks at the scale that we are doing. From your perspective, what the hell happened to us?
Trump, if you had a proper leadership, if you had a president able to give the example and considered as a possible example, it would not happen. Because, to be very clear, as for myself, I obey. I did wear the mask during the peak of the pandemic, and in the places where it is required, I am 100% disciplined. But I feel it as a disagreement. I know that if we met, you and me, with mask, it will not be a full human relationship. I know that we speak, you and me, and all of us, with our eyes, but also with our mouth, with your mustache, with my, you know, all of that belongs. A face means so much. A face is such an ethical reality that it is true that to bear a mask is a sort of sacrifice. It is a sacrifice. But there are some moments where you have to make some sacrifice. I did the sacrifice, you did all that. What you lack in America is what is required in the times of great sacrifices, which is a leader. A leader who says, it will take some time, it will not be forever, but for the moment you have to. Even if it is hot, even if you breathe a little less, even if the deaf, those who hear bad, hear even worse when you speak of that, you have to do it. What you lacked is a leader. And what we had is a president who has probably there are a few things maybe going wrong, but at least he is considered by the French people as a plausible, as a possible, as a credible example. When he wears a mask, the French citizens think, okay, we have to, and they do. We had this temptation of politicization probably, because there is also, but we did not. We did put our handkerchief on the possible quarrel, and we obeyed, because we had a leadership who showed the direction. This is what you don't have. And America, which is the fatherland of free spirit, without a leader, it can lead to this chaos in which you are, with governors acting like crazy competitors, with social networks saying that the most crazy idea has the same value as the truth, with the idea of alternative facts and all this bullshit, you know, and which is honestly the product of internet, of course, but accelerated by the sort of leadership you have.
Well, we're coming close to the end of the hour, and I've been keeping my eye on the questions as well. I want you to end by taking up two questions. How will Europe, because we want to take advantage of you being a European and being in Europe, how do you think France and Europe will be changed by this pandemic? And how do you think America and America's role in the world will be changed by this pandemic?
It will not be changed by the pandemic. It will be changed by political will and by reconnecting yourself or not with the American creed. It's not a question of the pandemic. I refuse the idea to give too much historical importance to this pandemic. I think that it is not unprecedented, and I think that there is not a before and an after. I think we will prevail over the pandemic. I hope. I hope that it will be less deadly than some of the past, but I don't think that as itself it will change the world, except the consciousness that a proper democracy has to have some proper hospitals, has to have a proper health system, that one of the worst inequalities is what I said before, those who have access to health and those who are forbidden access to it. This hopefully will change. For the rest, I don't put my hope in the good reaction to the pandemic in order to rebuild a better world. Alas, when the pandemic will be over, the world of before will restart with the same people on the two sides of the barricade. Those who are happy with the world as it is, and those who are honestly, genuinely, sometimes desperately trying to repair tikkun olam, the world. It will restart like that. And the real point for America is that America will have to reconsider itself as a fatherland of great values, of the creed of the founding fathers, and so on. What is happening with Europe is not due to pandemic. Europe is trying to take its destiny in hands, because we discovered for the first time that the American protection might not exist any longer. And for the moment, God forbid, if something terrible happened to Europe, for the first time since 1 century, America will not come under Trump to our rescue. But it is not the pandemic, it is Trump who created this state of political emergency in Europe, which some of us take into consideration. Macron, Merkel, they really think this new world. They really try their best to respond to the new challenge created by the retreat of America. And you have those. I am in Italy now. You have some people, the populists of left and of right, who are happy with that and who are ready to make a deal with Vladimir Putin, a deal with Erdogan, a deal with the worst militias in Libya in order to shoot the migrants who try to cross Mediterranean, and so on. This is a dividing line in Europe. But the dividing line is not pandemic. And I resist, as for myself, to the temptation to give too much historical, philosophical, historial importance in the Martin Heidegger sense to this pandemic. At the end of the day, it is a tragic disease. It is a lethal virus, but it is just a virus. And as I say in the book, a virus is pure suffering, is pure death, is the concentrate, is a sort of coagulation of evil, of poison, but it is not a messenger. It is not an agent of history or a ruse of history delivering a message to those who are ready to listen. I try in my book to resist to this way of considering the pandemic.
It's one area that I disagree with you on. I think it is a messenger. I think both SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2 are a messenger that we have expanded urban areas into wilderness areas. We have killed the apex predator in those wilderness areas. We've left behind generalized species of bats, rats, and primates who can live in destroyed ecosystems. Then we've gone in and even hunted those, and they evolved in the wild with their viruses, like the coronavirus. We've gone in, we've hunted those, we've extracted them, we've put them into wet markets in Guangzhou, which is where SARS-CoV-1 came from, and Wuhan of SARS-CoV-2, where they have jumped in some way we don't fully understand from these species to humans and to other mammals. And I do think it is a warning to us that when you press on Mother Nature too far, when you go to these extremes, you will get these deeply aberrant responses. And I do think this is a warning on climate, that if you do go to the same extreme on climate, climate change has a couple of differences with SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2. climate change doesn't peak. Viruses peak. Climate change doesn't peak. If we melt the Arctic ice, it'll be gone forever. It'll never reflect the sun again. The ocean will rise, and we will live with the implications of that forever. Not only does it not peak, there's no herd immunity to climate change. There's just an endless pounding on the herd. But there is one difference, which is that we actually have the vaccine for climate change, which is dramatically reducing CO2 emissions. So I actually that was one thing I disagreed with. I think there's an important warning here about going to extremes with nature. But we have a couple minutes left, I see. But I want to get you to talk about Israel and the Middle East. Both Israel and the Middle East. You referred to Kurdistan, different Middle East populations obviously wrestling with the virus and with political disintegration at the same time. Lebanon, Israel, Netanyahu thought that he had slayed this dragon, and now it's come back to bite him, triggering massive protests against Netanyahu. Take your lens from the book and apply it to the Middle East before we close.
Before we close, I want to say that on climate change, we are on the same page. I read you. I think I read most of your pieces about that. I agree 100%. It is an emergency. There are maybe not, or at least few more pressing political questions than resisting the climate change. I'm sure of that. And I used to say that we live in the first time in history, in human history, where the idea of the end of humanity has become a predictable historical event. In the old ages, it has always been taken into consideration, but as an impossible event, at the, how would I say, at the apocalyptic event happening in nearly another world. For the first time in human history, you have scientists who disagree if it is in 1 century, 2 centuries, 10 years, 5 centuries, but there is an agreement to say that the end of humanity because of climate change will happen in the time of human history. This is huge. About the viruses, you are right that the coronavirus is the product of the description you do. But the virus of the Spanish flu, the virus of the La Peste Noire, the virus of the coughing of Perint, 5th century before Christ, it was before climate change, it was before globalization, and they were killing viruses. So what I would say is a little different thing. There are so many viruses, as many viruses in humanity that as stars in the sky. Okay, there is a lot. Some take advantage of the overpower of Mother Nature. When nature is omnipotent, you have some viruses who come, and some take advantage of the hubris of mankind. You have the two sorts of virus. I don't know how to describe it. Maybe some scientists will do it one day, but I'm sure there is in a Mendeleev table board, there might be a difference between those who attack when Mother Nature is strong and those who attack when Mother Nature is raped. But the two are as killers as the others. About the Middle East, it depends. I was recently in Kurdistan, Israel, Kurdistan. There is such a mixture of things. I don't know if the main problem of Israel today is coronavirus. I'm not sure of that. There is a real problem about the destiny of Zionism, about giving a new breathing to the great dream of Zionism, which is for me one of the rare, well-achieved revolution of 20th century. Will it die? Will it survive? Will it revive? This is a real challenge for Israel. Is the COVID the big challenge? I'm not sure. It might be a mask. It might be a mask for those who don't want to raise the real existential question for the state of Israel itself. Same for the Kurdistan. Same for the Kurdistan, even if you look at the figures. So my reaction is really to be humble and careful, taking the countries, the situations in the world, case after case, and probably not. I try to prevent myself from generalizing too much.
Well, Bernard, thank you. This has been a treat to be in this dialogue. I urge everyone to now stay online, click up Amazon.com, look up Bernard's name, click on the book, buy the book. It's the least you can do. And it's been a treat for me. But anytime, Bernard, I always enjoy our conversation.
Great treat for me, Tom. Really, great honor. Great honor for me.
Thank you, both of you, for being with us tonight.